there's a process in law that this company followed for nearly a decade with $1 billion investment. They passed all of the regulatory hurdles at the highest standards in the world with flying colors. And talking about the energy transition, this project is an example of how we can play a role in that transition. It would be in the lowest quartile of carbon intensity of a barrel of oil on Earth, if allowed to go ahead. It would operate at 50% the carbon intensity of a barrel of bitumen, and 50% the carbon intensity of an average barrel of oil in North America. So in that world, not the fantasy land where we fuel a modern economy with pixie dust and unicorn farts, but in the real world, where there's tens of millions of barrels of oil being consumed, I would rather that a progressive Canadian mining company like Teck, at the lowest end of carbon intensity for oil, was part of the source, rather than us abandoning global markets to OPEC dictatorships, to California heavy crude, with a massively higher carbon footprint. So I don't even understand why we're into this argument. I can tell you one thing, though. In Quebec, when there was a government-subsidized cement factory opened 2 years ago, the McInnes cement factory in Gaspésie, which is projected to emit 2 million tons of CO2 every year, they were exempted from environmental review by the federal government. They were exempted from any environmental review by this federal government. And I have absolutely no doubt that if Bombardier was proposing to spend $20 billion to build a massive new airplane factory in the province of Quebec, not only would the federal government be exempting them from any regulation of the CO2 output from those airplanes, but they would be falling all over themselves to offer subsidies. And I have no doubt that if GM or Chrysler was proposing to spend $20 billion to create 8,500 good blue-collar jobs in Ontario to create new cars, that not only the federal government would they exempt them from any regulation or limitation on the emissions to be produced by those cars, but they would be offering subsidies to get it done. I have said to the Prime Minister repeatedly, that we are prepared to talk about this 100 megaton cap on the oil sands. I said that to him on April 17th, 12 hours after we won the election. My environment minister has said it to his counterparts now for 9 months. We get zero response on this good faith effort to reach out and find common ground and find a way forward. We get zero response to that. Instead, all we get are these passive-aggressive messages constantly emanating from Ottawa, when all that we ask is that the rule of law be respected and that this country demonstrate that we're a safe place in which to invest, that we don't follow Banana Republic-style rules where political preferences are substituted for regulatory decisions. So when you say why, all I can say is if this government was really that obsessed about if their central issue was carbon emissions, they would have stepped in and stopped the McInnes cement factory in Gaspésie. They wouldn't be subsidizing Bombardier in Quebec and the auto companies in Ontario that are responsible ultimately for massive CO2 emissions. It's not about emissions. It's not about environment. It appears to be about the West. We have worked very hard in the past 3 months to hit the reset button on our relationship with the Government of Canada. We've demonstrated good faith. We put out the TIER program, worked hard to get an equivalency agreement on that. It's been commended by many people who are advocates for the environment. We've worked very hard to get an equivalency on methane regulations. We've been taking leadership on habitat protection on caribou and on bison. We have offered to talk to them about the 100 megaton cap. We have tried to find common ground wherever possible. And I hope that this government puts the politics aside. This, by the way, this is not, people across the country should be equally concerned about this. Because if this prospective $20 billion investment is killed because of politics in the Liberal caucus room, as opposed to the objective application of environmental rules through a transparent regulatory process, it will send a chilling effect to global investors about the security of investing in this country. So that is why this is not, this would be, I think, a huge, historic mistake, economic mistake for the government to make if they were to reject it.